A lot of people watched that interview and the indignity of it. Here's the President of the United States being questioned in this manner. A lot of people's reaction was that sad. And my reaction was no, don't feel sorry for Biden. Don't feel sorry for him for 1 second. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. There's only one big story. It's a huge one. What is going on with Joe Biden, the presidency, his campaign? It is just an absolutely stunning story that's just getting worse and worse for him, for the Democrats, since that disastrous debate performance. I mean, every hour there seems to be something new. We're taping this on Monday, July the 8th, straight after the July the 4th holiday weekend. Who knows, by the time you listen to this, he may be out, I guess. But it doesn't feel like that to me. And that's really what I want to focus on here, which is the fight back, the Biden fight back, which started off rather faltering, but now really seems to have got pretty strong. And so I want to play for you the latest example of that. So this Monday morning, Monday, July the 8th, they are out with a full bore campaign to keep him in this race, even though obviously everyone can see that he can't do the job for another 4 weeks, let alone another 4 years. We've been saying that for years, actually. Let's not get into that whole conversation about how unbelievable it is that you now see all these people in the media saying, oh, yes, it's terrible. Can't do the job. It's terrible. You know, all these people have been lying to us for so long when we've been telling the truth about Biden's state for years. Anyway, let's put that aside. I just want to focus on this particular aspect of the fight back that's coming out this morning. So Joe Biden phoned in to Morning Joe, which is his favorite morning show, apparently. Remember how they used to mock Trump because he used to watch Fox News and so it's so embarrassing the president watches Fox News and then people go on Fox News to send him a message because they know he's watching, blah, 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 how terrible that was. Well, apparently exactly the same thing has been going on for years with Morning Joe on MSNBC. Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski host this show. It's on from, I think it's 4 hours, 6 a.m. till 10 a.m. Eastern time. Apparently it's Joe Biden's favorite show, and the White House even books particular guests in order to be on during the time that Biden typically watches, etc. So he goes on there and says something very, very interesting. Obviously, all the usual things about the fight back, but there's a particular angle that I want you to listen to, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot, just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
First of all, let's do a little fact check there. Biden says, I'm here for two reasons. No, you're there for one reason. And it's what you then went on to say. The elites. It was the elites that you're now railing against who put Biden there in the first place. That's exactly how it went down. Do you remember last time? He was a disaster in his third attempt to become president. So he ran before, he had to pull out the first time because of plagiarism. The second time he didn't get anywhere. And then this was his third go. And again, it was going nowhere. He was fourth and fifth in Iowa and New Hampshire. Absolute disaster. And then turned it around because Jim Clyburn, his pal, really influential voice in South Carolina, and they saw that Bernie Sanders was winning. Bernie was winning and set to win in South Carolina, set to run away with the primary. That's what the fear was. And so the elites, the party elite said, we cannot have Bernie Sanders. He's too left wing. So we got to get behind someone. Who is it going to be? Oh, poor old Joe Biden. Well, at least we can control him. So that's what happened. The elites put Biden in. The elites made Biden president, the party elites. And now he's turning around saying, I'm not going to let the elites push me around and tell me what to do. And what's hilarious about that is if you think about the party elites, whatever that means, I guess you could say it's the apparatchiks and the people who manage the big donors and the former officials and so on. Look what they did. I mean, it's just hilarious, really. It blew up in their face. They put in Biden because they could control him and and he's obviously not just incapable of being president in a literal sense in terms of his capacities, mental and physical, but actually in a more philosophical sense. And I've made this point over and over again, that Biden is a totally corrupt, weak machine politician. He's a mediocrity. He has no principles. He has no beliefs. He's been all over the place on every issue. He's only ever done one thing in the 50 years he's been plotting and scheming to become president, and that is to do whatever will help him advance up the ladder. In terms of his personal ambition. So they knew that. They know that he's totally pliable and flexible and everything. So the elites put him in because he'll do whatever they want. And the elites, by the way, these days in terms of the Democratic Party, it's really a combination of two things. It's the far left activists, the younger activist generation, and it's the unions, the government unions in particular, but the unions generally, and they basically control the party. And so they put him in because he'll do what they want, which is what he's done. And so you've had actually an agenda that's pretty close to what Bernie Sanders would have wanted, certainly what Elizabeth Warren would have wanted. So the elites put him in order to control him, and now they think, oh my goodness, it's not working for us anymore because he's going to lose to Trump. And so they're trying to get him out, and he's saying, no, those terrible elites, we're going to fight back against the elites. The whole thing is so hilarious. um, the second thing I wanted to say about all of this, and this really arose through two things that we just saw in a couple of days ago. You had two things at the same time. You had an amazing piece by Olivia Nuzzi in the New Yorker magazine, which was breathtaking, actually, in some of the details that it reported about Biden's total inability to function properly. I mean, just stories of friends who had known him for decades being introduced to him or coming up to him in an event, and clearly he didn't know who they were and needed to be reminded of who they were. So all these stories about his, this particular piece was very, very, searing in that sense. The fact that he goes to a fundraiser with 50 people in the room, at the house of Phil Murphy, who's the governor of New Jersey, and needs a teleprompter to make sort of remarks that are less than 10 minutes to a group of donors that aren't even televised or anything, because he just can't function. So this article was really it was devastating, really, for people who read all of it. And then the other thing was this George Stephanopoulos interview, which was on Friday. And that was another example where people watched that, and particularly it's not so much Biden's answers, but Stephanopoulos's questions, which were absolutely unrelenting. Actually, to be fair to him, a lot of people said, "Oh, it's going to be a soft interview." It was anything but. It was a very, very tough interview. But it was tough because it was actually very courteously done. He wasn't ranting and railing. He wasn't sort of yelling at Biden, but just asking these brutally honest questions. He said, "Are you more frail? Should you have a neurological exam?" Just really unrelenting and just simple and short, and let Biden kind of give him enough rope to hang himself with in the phrase. But I think a lot of people watched that interview, and the indignity of it, the fact that here's the president of the United States being questioned in this manner by someone who was a Democrat operative, just really, really, a lot of people's reaction was that's sad. It's just sad. It's undignified, and they felt sorry for Biden. And so one person who particularly had that reaction was Megyn Kelly. Obviously, we all know Megyn Kelly. I'm a huge fan of Megyn Kelly's. But on on X, I disagreed with her. She made the point that this is just really sad now. And he's like an old racehorse that just needs to be taken away and put out of his misery, because it's just sad to watch this happen to him. And my reaction was, no, don't feel sorry for Biden. Don't feel sorry for him for 1 second. For 50 years, he plotted and schemed to get this job. Right, going back to this story I've told before, it's in a book called What It Takes, about the 1988 presidential campaign, the primaries on both sides. It's like mini biographies of 6 of the candidates. One of them is Joe Biden. Back in his early 20s, in the 1960s, he goes back to the home of his then girlfriend, who became his first wife, who died tragically in a car accident. And they're just chatting away. This is the first time he meets her parents, and they say, "Oh, what are you going to do, Joe? What do you think you're doing?" And he says, "I'm going to be president." And they say, "President of what?" He says, "President of the United States." I says, "Okay, fine." So he's been desperate to be president for all his life, all his adult life. He's been plotting and scheming and doing whatever it takes, taking any position on any issue to get this job. And now, even though he knows he can't do it, he knows he can't do the job, he's still there, clinging on, desperate to keep the trappings of power and telling himself all these stories about how he's the only one that can beat Trump or whatever it is. Jill Biden, too, pushing him to stick in the race, just as she did, according to this book, in 1988, when everyone else was telling him he had to get out of the race because of the plagiarism. It was Jill Biden who said, no, don't listen to them, Joe, you stick it out. And so, no, why should we feel sorry for this guy? I mean, he is the ultimate machine politician mediocrity. He's got no qualification for doing this job other than his ambition to do it. And that is as strong today as it ever was. And you can say, well, that's fine. And being ambitious is good, but not at the cost of all this harm that it's doing. I mean, even if you just look at it from the point of view of how he's letting his party down, who obviously want him to go, let alone letting his country down. He's a vain, narcissist mediocrity, clinging on when everyone around him is telling him to go other than his immediate family. All the Democrats, the leaders, the elites, as he describes them, all telling him it's time to go. But no, he's clinging on because of personal ambition, vanity, narcissism, even though his record is a disaster, his leadership is non-existent. This man is a complete liability on every front, and yet he's still clinging on. So no, do not feel sorry for Joe Biden. So, a couple of things I wanted to cover in our policy discussion this week. One of them is something that's very important, but we missed. There's so much other news going on, so many other stories. This is from a couple of weeks ago, but it's a very significant ruling from the Supreme Court affecting one of the biggest issues here in California and really everywhere on the West Coast in particular of America, and that is homelessness. That's the Grants Pass ruling. Do I have to say it in an American accent? Grants Pass. I always find that when there are certain words that if you say it in a British accent, people literally don't know what you're saying. And as you know, Jen Horn, who is on the show this week for California Corner, she co-hosts a show, The Morning Answer, AM 870, The Morning Answer in Los Angeles, and her co-host is called Grant Stinchfield. And we always have a joke about me pronouncing his name like nobody else does, apart from Dr. Sebastian Gorka. We're both, I guess, from the UK. We call him Grant, which he thinks is highly amusing. And he says, I'm Grant. And so I make a joke about saying it in a very American way. Hence, when I talk about this ruling from the Supreme Court, my brain is immediately going to, instead of saying Grants Pass, Oregon, Grants Pass. Anyway, it's a very important ruling, all of that notwithstanding. And I do want to talk about it for a little bit. We'll get to that in a second. Before that, however, the news goes on, and we've just had really big news from, here's another one. I'm going to say France. Do I have to say France? Anyway, from that country that has just held the second round of its parliamentary elections. Real shock, real surprise. And I just wanted to say something about that because I know a lot of people have been asking me, well, what is going on with these European elections? They seem all over the place. We just had the British elections, massive victory for the Labour Party. But when you dig into it, it's not that big of a victory. One of the real winners, you could actually say, is Nigel Farage. And so a lot of people are saying, well, what is actually going on? One minute we're told that Marine Le Pen and the National Rally, her populist party, is a big winner. The next minute it's the far left. What's happening in Europe? Well, let me lay it all out. Let's just start with the French elections. So it's two rounds. It's the parliamentary elections, not the presidential elections. And on the first round, multiple candidates can run for the different parliamentary districts and constituencies. And in that first round, the National Rally, the renamed and rebranded National Front, the party that's described by the media over here as far right, Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, the 28-year-old parliamentary leader of her party, would say that they're a populist party of the mainstream. Now, you can go back and forth over that. What you can't dispute is that in the first round, they had a very, very successful night. And then you come to the second round a week later, and suddenly they're in third place. And the people who win the election is the left-wing bloc, including the far left bloc, led by a guy called Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is like more left than Bernie Sanders, you could say, on a lot of economic policy. And so this seems very confusing. What's going on? Well, the story in France and elsewhere in Europe, if you go back to the European elections a few weeks ago, there's a very simple theme that connects all of it, which is a vote against incumbents. That's really what's going on here. And so in the first round of the French elections, the protest against Emmanuel Macron and his very kind of elitist presentation of policy as well as his policy. He's an elitist style. In France, they call it Jupiterian, the presidency, where he's like Jupiter, sitting above everyone else. Big rejection of that, and a sense that he and his government totally out of touch with working people, and needs to be more focused on day-to-day practicalities. And so it's a combination of issues, for example, immigration, rejection of the climate extremism that has led to high gas prices, very familiar set of issues that we see here in America. So rejected in the first round, big result for Marine Le Pen's party. What happened in the week between round one and round two was that the other parties, so the far left and left-wing bloc, the socialist bloc of parties, it's more than one party in an alliance, got together with Macron's bloc, which is called the sort of mainstream centrist bloc, and they made a deal, an electoral pact, that they wouldn't run against each other in order not to split the anti-Marine Le Pen vote. So that's what happened. They basically formed an alliance to keep Marine Le Pen's party out, and as a result of that, when it came to the elections, in a lot of the places, you either had Marine Le Pen versus the Macron candidate, or Marine Le Pen versus the left-wing candidate. And what was really interesting about all of that, as it turned out, was that the main repository now of the anti-Macron vote was the far left, because they were the candidate, and the Macron candidate didn't even run. But what that really tells you is that the real sentiment in France is for change. It's a vote against the status quo. And that's why you've got this strange result where you had Marine Le Pen's party doing really well the first round and came in third the second round. The thing that connects it is a vote against the status quo and the establishment. Then you go to England, and you had the same sort of phenomenon going on, where Keir Starmer, the new prime minister, on the one hand, if you follow those results, huge parliamentary majority, 400 plus seats in the parliament, massive majority, nearly 200, very much on the scale of Tony Blair's massive win in 1997. So the word that was used to describe it when the exit poll came out on the BBC, landslide for Labour, landslide win. But actually, when you look at the popular vote, the share of the vote that they got, it's tiny compared to previous election winners. In fact, the Labour Party got fewer votes and a lower share of the vote this time than a couple of years ago in the elections in England, when they actually lost. It's a really, their share of the vote was like something like 33.8%, something like that, tiny, really, really low. But yet it turned into a massive parliamentary victory. The people who did really well and actually had a really strong performance was Nigel Farage's party, which he only joined and led and decided he was running for election like 4 weeks ago. And from nothing, this party called Reform, they got nearly half the share of the vote than Keir Starmer, who won, the Labour Party. So Nigel Farage's Reform Party got 14% of the vote. But instead of the 400 seats that Keir Starmer got, they got 4, because of the way the actual electoral system works, the first past the post system, which is that if you come in top in the constituency, you get the win, even though your share of the vote may be very low. So what it really was in England, it was a landslide, but it was a landslide against the Conservative Party that had been in power for a long time. And just as you saw in France, people felt they were out of touch with people's everyday concerns. The cost of living was going up, taxes too high. And in particular, in the UK, you could say they didn't do anything that anyone really noticed to make the most of the Brexit vote, which so many people thought would, and the whole argument in favor of Brexit was that it would mean an opportunity to cut taxes and cut regulations and control immigration, all these promises that were made when Brexit happened, None of that seemed to have been delivered. That's what people were voting against, as well as the fact you'd had 14 years of a conservative government. You'd had lackluster prime ministers, constantly changing, sense of chaos and drift, and nothing really working. So it was a rejection of all of that, but not in any way an endorsement, really, of the Labour Party alternative. So we'll see. I have a feeling that they could become very unpopular very quickly, because as some people have, this is a term that some commentators in the UK have used to describe the Labour Party victory. It is a loveless landslide. There's no love there. There wasn't some great enthusiastic vote in favour of the Labour Party. It was a rejection of the establishment and the status quo. So I think that is what you have in common across Europe, actually. If you go back to the European elections a couple of months ago, a rejection of the establishment and the incumbent. And if you fast forward to our elections here in America, you can see that that is pretty much the sentiment, I think, when you think about how people are talking about Biden and the Biden people constantly going on about how everything's great, the economy's doing well, because they know it's not. We're sick of it. It feels like that time for change mood is very much part of our election story here as well. Now, let's get to the very important ruling from the Supreme Court, Grants Pass. So this is about one of the issues at the absolute heart of dealing with this crisis of homelessness that has afflicted us particularly strongly here in California, but it's also up and down the West Coast. You see it in Washington and Oregon, and there's a reason for that. And this ruling is at the heart of it. The particular thing at issue is whether or not governments, local governments, city governments, counties, or whatever, can actually remove people from the streets who are camping illegally. Most of the places where you see these terrible scenes of tents on the street and these encampments and these terrible dystopian videos that we all see, particularly from here in California, people living in conditions we'd never want to see anyone live in. One of the in most of those places, it's against the law. There are local ordinances or laws against public camping. Well, what happened was that going back a few years, there was a ruling in a case against Boise in Idaho, where the plaintiffs were saying removing us from the streets constitutes cruel and unusual punishment and is therefore unconstitutional. You can't give us a ticket or a fine or just remove us just for the act of being homeless and on the street, even though that may contravene local laws. And so in the way that that usually does, it wound itself through the courts and ended up with this ruling in Grants Pass, Oregon. Grants Pass is a town in Oregon, had the same kind of case. They relied upon this precedent previously, the plaintiffs, the Boise precedent, which has for years been cited here in California by Democrats in charge, saying, well, look, we'd love to clean the streets and keep public order and remove homeless encampments, but we can't because of the Boise ruling. That was what it was always known as, the Boise ruling. And now this was challenged in the form of this case, and the court rejected it and said, sorry, that clause in the Constitution against cruel and unusual punishment was never meant to cover anything like this, so no, it's overturned. And so that now, in the telling of Democrats like Gavin Newsom, who signed an amicus brief in this case, supporting the overturning of that ruling, they're all celebrating, saying, now this is great. This means that we can finally do something about homelessness. That's the story that's coming out. And the reason it's not just California to the West Coast is because the original ruling, the Boise ruling, was the Ninth Circuit, which covers the Western states. These governors and mayors and so on in somewhere like LA County, the Board of Supervisors, they all say that they've been hamstrung by these rulings. There's nothing they can do because the precise formula in the original Boise ruling was that if you're trying to criminalize people for breaking public encampment laws and remove them forcibly, you can only do so if you have adequate shelter available for everyone who's living on the streets. That was the condition. And so these places were saying, well, we can't do that, and therefore there's nothing we can do. We have to just like literally stand by and do something at the margins, but we can't take people off the streets, which any normal person would say is the humane thing to do. But now we can. That's what they're saying. Now, there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, it's not true. They absolutely could have complied even with the earlier ruling and removed people from the streets. And by the way, we've had people on the show who've done that. Even here in California, I remember the mayor of Coronado down in San Diego County who did exactly this, who actually did enforce local anti-camping ordinances and did so by ensuring that adequate shelter was available. And that adequate shelter is can be defined many different ways. But what you've seen happen in a lot of these Democrat-controlled cities is that the homelessness activists and the organizations that benefit from the current state of play, and developers, real estate developers, housing developers, who also benefit from this, they've been in this unholy alliance to argue that the only kind of shelter that is acceptable if you're trying to remove someone from the street is basically an apartment, a full-time, a home of their own that they get. And so you've ended up with this ludicrous situation where, for example, in Los Angeles, you see stories of homelessness shelters being built at the cost of $800,000 per unit, because they built as if they were regular apartments, and therefore they're subject to all the ridiculous regulations and nonsense that make housing so expensive in California generally. But of course, that's not the only kind of shelter that you could provide. There's loads of versions of shelter that would have complied with the law short of that kind of incredibly expensive housing. But they chose not to do it, right? So for all these years that they've been blaming the Boise ruling for not taking action, I think they've been hiding behind it and using it as an excuse for their own failures. Well, the second big point from all of this is, well, now there's no more excuse. There's nothing to hide behind. And if you combine it with what happened here in California with Gavin Newsom's ballot initiative, that he just about barely got qualified, Proposition 1, earlier this year, which he sold as being the big answer to the homelessness crisis, particularly the mental health aspect of it. You put those two things together, and now there's no excuse. Right? He got billions and billions of dollars from the taxpayer to fund what he said he needed in terms of mental health provision for the homeless. And now the Supreme Court has overturned this ruling that they've been saying has held them back from clearing the streets. So there we are. There's nothing now to hide behind. Whatever you think about the validity of their arguments in the past, we can all agree there is nothing stopping them from dealing with homelessness properly once and for all. So I guess the message is, we are watching and we are waiting, but we're not going to wait forever. That is the consequence of this Grants Pass ruling. No more excuses for Democrats who fail to tackle homelessness. All right, joining us for California Corner, it is Jen Horn. It feels, Jen, as if it's been, I don't know, ages. It's just we get so used to our rhythm. But you've been off doing a fantastic cruise. We were just joking about how I used to think cruises were such a sort of nightmare. And now they seem increasingly attractive, especially the one that you've just done. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to hear all about it. It's a very special kind of cruise, lots of politics and policy and activism, and it's all great. In Alaska, just in case people are wondering. We'll get to that in a second, but there's a lot of madness to catch up on in California. So you weren't here last week when it was all going down in Sacramento, but I know you've been following it. I mean, let's just start with this absolutely humiliating denouement. There were the French elections just now, so I'm going to use a French word, the denouement of the absolutely outrageous assault on our democracy. I'm going to use that term that we've been seeing from the Democrats. We've been covering it for weeks now, because it is weeks now that they have been trying to get off the ballot basically anything that they don't like. And so we, the people, put on the ballot through the proper processes the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, which would stop them raising taxes endlessly and without limit. So what do? Sue to get it off the ballot. They have a pliant California Supreme Court with 6 Democrat-appointed justices out of 7, get it off the ballot. Then the next one they turn their attention to, Prop 47 reform, which is so needed. We all know the reasons why. Prop 47 turned into a complete disaster, right at the heart of so much that's gone wrong in terms of crime and homelessness and retail theft, all that kind of stuff. So we have this fantastic ballot initiative that reforms it in a very sensible way. Some of us might say it doesn't even go far enough, but you've got a really, really big coalition behind it. DAs across the state and retailers and some Democrats, including the mayor of San Francisco, mayor of San Jose. No, not good enough. The Sacramento Democrats want to kill this one as well. And so they've tried every trick in the book. And the last thing that played out last week, so they passed that they failed with their terrible tactics to persuade the coalition behind the Prop 47 reform initiative that qualified for the ballot to take it off the ballot voluntarily. And then they failed with their legislation and their poison pill stuff to sort of automatically cancel things that would and rewrite the ballot initiative in order to put people off voting for it. That failed. So the last thing they tried was to put together a rival initiative and get it on the ballot at the last minute, cobbling something together that Gavin Newsom was pushing incredibly hard, forcing the legislators in the Assembly and the Senate to pass something. It was last Sunday, all right, and in order to comply with their deadline. And then they were like trying to get everyone to pass this, and we got to do it by Wednesday. And they were all building towards Wednesday night, just before the 4th of July, Wednesday night, late night vote in Sacramento to get this thing on the ballot to try and scupper the real reform, a kind of lightweight version of it. And then at the last minute, literally that day, they just pull it. I mean, since we last did a show, they just, okay, not going to bother with that then. And Newsom just says, actually, I'm going off to Washington, D.C. to try and prop up Biden. And sorry, guys, we're not doing this after all. I mean, what a joke.
Well, he's busy carrying around his drool bucket because he's this close from the Oval Office, Steve. So, he had a lot of stuff to do. He could taste it. He's so close. But I really think it's interesting when you hear Democrats talking about how Republicans or President Trump are a threat to our democracy when they, in real time, are killing our democracy in California. I mean, think about what you just laid out. First, it was the California Taxpayer Protection Act, which basically just said that we would get to vote as taxpayers. We would get to vote as registered voters in California to approve any taxes with a majority of votes. I mean, that is not unheard of. That is actually something that I think many of us think we should be doing no matter what. And Gavin Newsom killed it by going to the extreme measure of taking it up to the California Supreme Court. It's dead. So taxpayers are again, free reign, free target on taxpayers in California when we're already suffering enough. And our leadership is trying to pretend like they care about the crutch and the burden of staying in the state. Instead of easing it, they're making it worse. So that's outrage number one. Outrage number two is that a group of people led by DAs and sheriffs and police officers and law enforcement, as you mentioned, Democrats and Republicans come together and take on the gigantic effort of collecting over 1 million signatures to get this ballot initiative on the ballot. I mean, Steve, this is not an easy task. You've worked on these measures before,
Yes.
so have I. This is hard work to get legitimate signatures, to get organized, to get the signature collection underway, and you actually accomplish the goal. And then you have the Democrats in Sacramento who are running things with the supermajority saying, your hard work is for nothing. We're going to try to figure out a way to confuse people. We're going to try to put another ballot measure on the November ballot so that we can try to confuse people out of just amending Proposition 47, which apparently, and I talked to Assemblyman Bill Asaley on my program on the Morning Answer on Monday morning, and he said that they saw internal polling, and that's what scared the Democrats because the polling for Prop 47 is not just extremely good for people who care about these these kinds of problems that we have, crime and safety, but it also was going to drive more Republican voters to the polls in November, and that scared Democrats, which is why the DNC had asked them to do this last minute push to try to kind of demoralize conservative voters in the state of California. And the idea behind it was that there's a lot of congressional seats that are going to be tight. Mike Garcia, Ken Calvert, he's being challenged. Scott Baugh looks positioned to take Katie Porter's seat. That's a seat Democrats want to hold on to. So there are a lot of close congressional races throughout the state of California. And Democrats were saying typically Republicans aren't too excited to go vote in presidential years because they feel like their vote doesn't count. that Trump's not going to win California, so they don't show up. But this initiative showed that it was going to actually build momentum and get conservative voters and more conservative leaning independents to show up. And Democrats were afraid that it was going to threaten those congressional seats that they have their eyes on. And that's why they put in this last ditch effort to try to throw out the will of the people behind this initiative. And thankfully, it backfired because that's really the truth. That threat. Let us all decide for ourselves. Let us decide what is appropriate for our state. We don't need Sacramento to do that.
And it's so outrageous, the attitude. I think that what is just so clearly revealed by all this is that just the arrogance. I've used this phrase before. They're just drunk on power, right? They assume
Yeah.
that there's no legitimate opposition, and it's just that, how dare you try and challenge what we think is
Question
right?
us. Right.
How dare you? And and so this extraordinary attempt to steamroller their views through, and it's particularly egregious because you mentioned there's the supermajority in the legislature, which means that they can pass things, including the budget, which they just did, and all this legislation without any input from Republicans at all, right? They just
That's
do
right.
whatever they want. So the entire conversation, the entire policy conversation is going on within the Democratic Party between I mean, I'm not even going to say the left I think they're all in California now far left. That's the sort of baseline. And you could say the extreme far left. I mean, it's all extreme. I don't know, the fringe left, maybe you could say. That's where the conversation is happening, and that excludes. Remember, this is the point that we always have to come back to. That people say, "Oh, it's such a deep blue state." No, it's not. It's much more Republican than people think. In actual elections statewide, the average share of the vote for Republicans in the last 20 years, since Republicans last won statewide, is 41.7%. And you have someone like Lan Chen last time got 44% and so on. So let's just even call it 40%, right? Not argue about that kind of 1 or 2 points in there. So 40%, that 40% of Californians who vote, their views are just completely excluded. So what
Right.
have they got left other than these ballot initiatives? I mean, that's the only actual, power that you have, and it's in our constitution for a reason. And they just want to completely deny it. I mean, that's what's revealed by all this. They just don't care. They are not interested in any kind of compromise. All the things that they say about Republicans and Trump at the national level, threat democracy, this, that, they are exhibiting. I mean, it's just so frustrating. I mean, we call it projection or whatever, but I mean, they are literally the ones here in California who are undermining democracy. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And just to put a point on that, you mentioned this cruise that I was on. I took listeners to Alaska, and we can talk more about that in a second. But one of the speeches that I gave was I titled it "Lessons from the Left Coast," and basically the idea of that is learning the lessons of California, the mistakes that California has made along the way to try to prevent them from happening in your own state. And one of the things that really kind of sticks to me is that apathy has kind of killed us in California, and so you have a lot of these conservative voters who just don't turn out because they think that their vote doesn't matter. And I think what's so important for us to underscore is that maybe it doesn't matter when it comes to voting between Biden and Trump, but it does matter in these local races that are being decided by a couple of hundred votes. And so this is the message, I think, to not just conservatives. This is so far beyond Republicans and Democrats, but people who have lost hope in the state of California, that we have to get out there and we have to vote, because this is the only way that we're going to change this. And I think what's happening with the ruling party in a state where there really is only one, and that's the Democrats, is that they try to do these things literally to demoralize us. If
Yes.
they see that there's excitement behind an amendment or just at least an edit of Proposition 47, which I know if you and I were together, we'd say it doesn't go far enough, of
Yeah.
course, but at least it does something better. And if people are excited about that and they see that people are excited about it, they want to kill that excitement within us. And that's what we have to stop in this state, is that common sense has to rule. And that means the end of apathy. We can't have shoulder shruggers saying my vote doesn't matter anymore,
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter if people don't turn out. And that's why I really hope, and I have a lot of positive energy going into this coming election in November for us, that we will at least have a victory when it comes to Proposition 47, because
Yes.
people are excited excited to go out and vote for something. And that is something that needs to be exploited. And we need to find those things in each and every election moving forward.
I think exactly right, and I think that the other one that I'm looking at as a kind of signal of the people want change is actually where you are, the LA DA's race.
Yes.
George Gascon. I've got a look. Nathan Hochman seems to be doing incredibly well. Um, he's been a guest on this show many times. He's picking up endorsements all over the place. And I think he seems to be fighting a very good campaign for LA, right? Which is
Yeah.
compared to the rest of the state, more on the left. And I think he's just showing that there's an appetite for change. So if you get Nathan Hochman elected, George Gascon defeated, that sends a message right across the country. And then Prop 47 as well. Now they've tried, especially when they've tried so hard to kill Prop 47 reform. If after all of that, it triumphs, as I'm very confident it will. That's a really, really big message that
Be a
people want
great
change.
day, the day after the
Exactly. Yeah,
election
yeah,
in
yeah.
November, or maybe
I
3
know.
weeks after the election when we
Well,
finally see
exactly.
those results. But, the
Exactly.
one thing to add about Nathan Hochman is, it really is his to lose. Remember in the primary, Gascon only got, what, 23, I think
Yeah,
23%
just
of
about
the
that. Yeah.
vote, just about. And so if everybody coalesces behind Hochman, it's his to win. And I believe that George Soros, there was a story in the California Globe, Soros has not funded Gascon's race for reelection yet. So that tells me, look, you can say a lot of things about George Soros, but he knows his moments and he knows his opportunities. Maybe he hasn't thrown any money into the race. Maybe it's going to come later, but maybe he sees this as an opportunity that's already lost because Gascon has been so bad for Los Angeles. And that would be great news for Nathan Hochman, who's going to have to spend a lot to beat the guy with the
Yes.
brand name.
A couple of things I just wanted to add into the mix on this part of the conversation. Then I want to turn to what Gavin Newsom's been up to, instead of dealing with the problems that we have here in California. But just two more points to add. First of all, it's a very important thing that we need to remember because, again, look at the national conversation. All the time you have the left going on and on about the popular vote versus the electoral college. Now, well, the electoral college for the presidency, it favors Republicans. It's so unfair. You've got this, inbuilt bias towards Republicans. You have small states like Wyoming or whatever, same weight as California in the Senate, and then the electoral college isn't quite as distorted. But the argument, right? It's not fair, right? And Biden wins 7 million in the popular vote, but barely squeaks through in the electoral college last time. Now, first of all, that I just so that we've captured everything as we discuss it, I always make the point, yeah, but those are the rules, and that's how the
Right.
campaigns are fought. Now, if you had the presidency decided on popular vote, which I actually favor, then you would have way more campaigning for those votes in places like California by Republican candidates. And so here's the math that I think the Democrats haven't really thought through if they really want to pursue this. There are far more Republicans in California who may not vote than there are Democrats in Wyoming who may not vote. So I'm not
That's
sure
right.
there. I think if you did have electoral college, a popular vote for president, I think it would actually in the end favor Republicans. So, but put that to one side. The point I'm making is that when you look at California, these structural things work to the Democrats' advantage. So you have, a much closer popular vote, if you like, as I said, 60-40, call it that. It's actually higher than 40 when you have statewide elections. But you look at the legislature, it's 80-20 in terms of the balance of power. So in the state assembly, it's 62 Democrats and 18 Republicans. In the state Senate, 32 Democrats, 8 Republicans. That is not reflective of the politics of California at all. Why
I
has it
know.
happened? A big part of it is this top two system, where you have these races now where the top two finishers go forward, and actually you've had business organizations and all the rest of it. They end up supporting the person that they think is more likely to win, and often that's what they laughably call a moderate Democrat ends up being someone who's just as much a disaster as the far left Democrat. And so the whole system is now pushing that. So there's a structural problem there where we should make more of that unfairness here in California. Since it's a 60-40 state, why is our legislature 80-20? It's not
It's a
fair, not
great
right.
question. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think also I think because people are so polarized when it comes to politics now, and nobody will talk to one another, and nobody wants to get out of their corner. I think you and I are the exceptions. I think we like to go and talk to everybody, but I think if we were really all given truth serum, Steve, you would see that most people agree that you get the most done when you have people from two different perspectives, but who are willing to work together. Wouldn't it be nice in our state of California if we put aside all of the power wielding and actually just said, you know what, we're going to start working for the people. We're going to instead of playing the political game, instead of playing the chess, we're going to actually start delivering for our constituents. Our state could be so amazing if we started allowing people in
Well, this is
with
what doesn't
differing
happen. I
viewpoints.
mean, every time I'm in Sacramento having policy conversations, including with
Yeah,
Democrats, all the time they say, when I go there, for example, on how to get housing built, we need to end the private right of action under CEQA that allows all these lawsuits to be filed that block anything from ever being built. And they say, yeah, we agree with that, but the unions will never allow it. As it,
right.
that's they say it as a matter of course. They're like, oh yeah, sorry, but can't do it. The union everywhere you go in Sacramento, that's the answer you hear is the unions. Well, hang on a second, whoever elected them.
Right.
But of course, they fund the Democrats. The other point I just wanted to make about this arrogance of power that they have, the ruling class and the ruling elite here in California is another example of it in terms of ballot initiatives. We've talked about it before, but let's just not omit it from this conversation. This is exactly what they did earlier in the year when Huntington Beach passed voter ID through a
Right.
ballot initiative. So they put the leadership there, political leadership, full disclosure, who I know very well, Tony Strickland and his team there in Huntington Beach, put voter ID on the ballot. It was passed in Huntington Beach. The people said, this is how we want to do our elections. Almost the next day, I think it might even have been the next day, the state of, Gavin Newsom, Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, sue
Of
to
course.
stop them, just like they did with the taxpayer protection. So this has already been passed. They sue to block it. And they get their cronies in the legislature to put in legislation that would stop anywhere else from following suit and implementing
It's
voter
like
ID.
they
So, like,
pat you on the head. Yeah, they say, "Great job, voters. Okay, you go out and pass something. Too bad, we know better." They pat you on the head and they send you back. I mean, it was the same thing going after the school boards, the same thing going after these local cities and counties who say, "You know what? We wanna create something that works for us." But they're not allowed, and it's really outrageous, and it's frustrating.
it's the arrogance of untrammeled power
Yep,
now. And it's not as if, I mean, it wouldn't. It's a principle that we should uphold, that the people should have a say, and their views should not just be steamrolled. So even if it produces great results, it's not right. But actually, it doesn't produce great results. It's producing absolutely terrible results, and that's been to the fore. And I want to get your take on this whole conversation about Gavin Newsom and California and Biden and all the rest of it, because going back to last week, the reason that he sort of skipped this whole thing and said, "Okay, I'm pulling my rival initiative because I have to go to Washington to support Biden," and he's been really, of all of the people he around, and we all know what happened with the debate and Biden's credibility collapse, and he's clinging on, and all these Democrats are telling him to get out, and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that in a second. But the strongest supporter is Gavin Newsom, and so that's one thing that we've seen. He's really emerged as the single. What's that guy called, Baghdad Bob? Was it Baghdad? Saddam Hussein's press spokesman, who's
yeah, I
like,
remember it was
okay,
Baghdad Bob,
but
yeah.
back up. It's like constantly sort of, everything's fine, it's all great. So he's like that for Biden now. Um, and the other thing that's happened, I want you to get your comment on both these things. The other thing that seems to have happened is that Gavin Newsom, who not that long ago was on everyone's list of who's going to step in if Biden doesn't make it, actually at the top of the list, I was stunned. The New York Times Sunday opinion section, on the front, we get the paper delivered old-fashioned way, and on the front of the section it said, "Who should step in if Biden?" Our all our opinion writers weigh in, and then they did a double-page spread, and they had their columnists, their main opinion columnists, all picked a candidate, and they had 6 candidates, and they made the case for each of them. And guess who was missing? Gavin Newsom.
No Newsom,
Not
huh?
even on the list of the top 6
Wow.
in the New York Times. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I have some definite I would say just gut feelings on why Gavin Newsom is acting this way. First of all, being in California, I think it is no secret that we know Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris are frenemies. They don't really like each other. They've always competed with one another. And I actually think that it benefits politically Gavin Newsom sticking in Joe Biden's corner, hoping he sticks it out and loses. And then he has 2 years of being Trump's top critic. You already saw him in
Right,
Michigan
right. Yeah.
this weekend. Gavin Newsom was out and talking about how Trump didn't help during the wildfires, which is the biggest lie. He's on video actually standing next to Trump saying how great their relationship was dealing with the natural disasters and the fires and all of this. So it's ridiculous. But now he's out there saying he had to beg Trump for help. So I really feel that Gavin Newsom is staying with Joe Biden, kind of rooting with Republicans that he stays in and maybe loses to Trump so that Gavin has 2 more years as the governor of California to be the loudest critic of Trump. And then he announces his campaign and he can go challenge some Republican candidate that's going to come down the line. Because I know people love to play the game about who could replace Biden, but truly Democrats are going to have a really hard time, playing leapfrog over Kamala Harris, especially because they are the party of DEI. And I've read some reports, I think it was Axios, saying that Kamala Harris behind the scenes has said, well, if it is me, my choice for vice president, it's not going to be Gavin Newsom. It's going to be Mayor Pete Buttigieg or it's going to be Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. So those are the two people seems to be leaning towards if she is the person, if Jill allows Joe to step aside. Um, I just can't imagine because of the money, because of this late date, that you're going to be able to bring someone in brand new. Now, I may be totally wrong, but I don't see how you can bring in a Pritzker or a Newsom or even a Westmore or a anybody, because at least now you could make the argument that Kamala could at least hold on to the $200 million that they have if Biden steps aside and she becomes the nominee. And you couldn't make that argument for any other candidate. So
Yes.
I think Newsom is being the person we know, and that is all about himself. He is focusing on helping Biden because I think he believes strategically that is going to be his strongest position moving forward because we know he wants to be sitting in that Oval Office.
I think that is a perfect summary of the actual situation, all around, and I think that you're exactly correct that in terms of who it's going to be, it's so interesting to me how just in the space of 10 days since the debate disaster, the entire conversation around this, which had been bubbling up, and there had been people saying, well, maybe Biden should step aside. And for the longest time, it was there should be an open convention and it'll be a little bit messy, but it'll be dynamic and exciting, and people are going to be interested in the Democratic Party, and we'll see the talent on display, and it's going to be great. That was really the dominant narrative, from Democrats and Democrat media. And now, when it looks like this is really serious, and they really mean it, that they need to get rid of, it's almost overnight. It went to no, we can't have that. It's got to be Kamala Harris. And now that seems to be the dominant narrative. You still got a couple of people saying they should have an open convention, but it's almost all gone away to saying we need an orderly transition. He needs to anoint her, hand the torch, etc. And that's happened. It's so interesting how these narratives just sort of emerge and then become dominant. It happened very, very quickly.
And don't forget that Democrats don't really care about the candidate. The Democrat Party, the people who are most successful at the top, find themselves to be transactional. That's why Joe Biden was appointed. That's why Kamala Harris was put in as vice president. This is why the Democrat Party, at least the leadership, never embraced Bernie Sanders because. Say what you will about Bernie Sanders, he's not transactional. He's fully
Yes,
ideological. And so
yes.
he's not going to budge on the stuff that he thinks is going to be best for the country. And these Democrats that are now making their way are the kind that are being run really by the people, the unnamed people behind the scenes within the party apparatus, the people who work in the White House. They're the ones who are pulling the strings. And so they can use Kamala Harris. And I think the scariest part for me, as someone who would really like to see a second term of President Trump, is that you get people excited about Kamala Harris. They will vote for someone if you whip up the excitement of being the first Black woman, whether or not she is good, whether or not she likes to say community banks or banks within the community. I mean, all of that we know. We know Kamala from being here in California. We know who she is. She's not the greatest or most exciting politician, but there is something, a story to tell that could be whipped up with her that could spark some interest in the Democrat voting bloc. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I really always believe that Gavin Newsom is always operating in his own best interest because that is who he is. And that's why he's out there as the only, maybe the only, not just the loudest, but the only supporter on the Democrat
Yeah.
side of Joe Biden sticking it out.
But I mean, now you say it. I mean, it's very transparent. You put it so clearly, and it's putting those pieces together. Not only because, well, all the elements, right? One, he can't possibly challenge Kamala Harris, right? You
No
can't
way.
have that's just not realistic. Even if they, I suppose, if they had an open convention, it was truly open, and lots of other people were throwing their hat in the ring. I suppose he might, but he's not going to be the one that steps up to challenge. As you say, it's a party that's completely consumed by identity politics. So the idea that you have a white guy who's going to challenge a black woman, forget about it.
Yep.
It's death to his hopes, right? So he knows he can't do that. And so what's left, right? Well, you you have to hope that Biden
Support
clings on.
Joe and hope
Support
he
Joe.
loses. He's
And that
actually rooting for
yes,
Trump.
yes, he's rooting for Trump. That's brilliant. That's exactly right.
Yep.
Because
It's
then, and the part that I'd really hadn't paid attention to, but you're completely right, is the 2 years of being the lead Trump antagonist,
yep.
which is a role that he really lent into the last time.
And
Endless
forget the last
lawsuits
time.
against,
Yeah, what he's done also now with Ron DeSantis and
yeah,
Texas governor, and I'm totally Swiss cheesing,
Abbott. Yeah.
Abbott, Greg Abbott. I mean, this is what he's been doing is sitting on the sidelines, just saying terrible things. And yeah, he was the biggest legal challenger to the Trump administration. He'll do that again, but he's also got this loud platform where he's going to go after whoever he can to be this critic of Trump and Republican policies. And then he'll have a better shot of actually winning because you can't leapfrog Kamala in today's Democrat Party. You can't.
My favorite thing, let's just end on this, and I want to ask you about the cruise, right? My favorite moment was that he puts out in support of Joe Biden this tweet, which was it shows the sort of laughable lack of self-awareness and complete disdain for the record and what's actually happening in California. He said something about Joe's the one, la da da, results matter. Right,
Right.
that's what results matter. And then he listed a couple of things like the lowest unemployment for whatever, I can't remember, a few kind of facts that they cherry picked from the Biden administration's record. I said, yeah, great. Results matter. So here they are for California.
Right. How about
The
ours?
highest, exactly, the highest unemployment in the country, the lowest income growth, the highest taxes, the highest rate of poverty, the highest housing cost, the lowest home ownership, the highest gas prices, the highest energy costs, the worst business climate. I mean, on and on. I mean, I make this point, but like he's got the worst record of
Yeah.
any governor in the country and it's by a mile. I mean, it's on almost every single issue. We are, depending which way you do the list, either 50th out of 50 or number one at the top of the bad lists. It's just
He's
hilarious. And then he
definitely in
puts
an
out a tweet
alternate
saying
reality.
results matter. Yeah, they
I
do.
know. He also said Biden had what did he say? This is my favorite. He said, he's historically the most transformative president. And I went, yeah, he transformed us into a dumpster fire. Like,
That's
what were we
amazing.
doing?
It's so amazing.
Transformative. Hmm.
All right, so then let's yeah, well, we'll, as they say, we'll follow it. Who knows by next week where we're going to be. They will say this is the crucial week for Biden. We'll see. Um, uh, your cruise. So tell us a bit about that. Alaska.
Yeah.
It's really fun actually.
It was great, and, I have done Alaska before. If you haven't been to Alaska, it is one of the most spectacular places, if you love nature and you love wildlife. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, and so that was great to have that as our backdrop, but this was actually the Patriots Alaska cruise, so I went in a work capacity. It was a nice working vacation, and we took 400 people, listeners of our stations and all across the country, and I went alongside Mike Gallagher, who's on Salem Radio, and Sebastian Gorka, Chris Stegall from Philadelphia, Katie Gorka, Seb's wife, who I also host a podcast with called Happy Women, and Joey Hudson, who is from South Carolina, local host there. And so it was great to have panel discussions, get to know you discussions, but I told you my most favorite moment was our last panel that I hosted alongside Katie Gorka, and we did an activation panel about people getting more involved with the election. And Steve, my heart felt so good because after the panel was over, the people from the cruise who were there from California and from Arizona got together. They took over a conference room on the ship, which I thought was very cool. And they actually started making plans to go back and to get more
Amazing.
involved and to bring people along. And so it was incredibly inspirational, not only the sights and being on the cruise and seeing all that beauty, but also having people feel like there's real hope and that even in California, there is so much that is still worth fighting for. And I don't know, that was a great way to end the cruise on Friday, hearing that they were able to get together and stay in touch and make some real plans because we all have to be active participants. No more
Yes,
sitting on the
exactly.
sidelines, no more apathy. We all need to be a part of this process if we want to save our state.
Amazing. I love that. That sounds great.
I do
It's
too.
making me think we should do a Steve Hilton show cruise at some point. I don't know, like
I
where we're
think
going
you
to go.
absolutely should. I
We'll
think
have
it's
you. We have
amazing.
Susan Shelley. It's going to be great.
Yep.
It sounds fun, doesn't it?
It was really fun, and I think it would be great, and you know what? The great thing about doing a Golden Together, a Steve Hilton cruise would be the positivity. You know, I think so many times people think politics are negative, but we didn't have one negative moment on the ship. Yes, we had a lot to
Wow.
talk about with Biden and the debate performance, but everybody was so hopeful about doing something more to achieve the results that we're looking for. So, I think it's a great idea. I'd be happy
All
to
right.
do it.
We'll do it. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Great. Well, we're happy you're back, though. That's also true.
I'm happy to be
Um,
back too. It's always good to
um,
get back into my schedule.
Fantastic. So we will see you very soon. Jen Horn, AM 870, The Morning Answer. Make sure you listen every day, especially Friday when I'm on, right?
That's the best time of day. The best time of the
Exactly.
week to listen.
Fantastic. See you soon, Jen. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So I love the 4th of July as a celebration. It just reminds us why we're all here and so proud to be American. Um, I just love everything about it. I feel so patriotic every time, and I feel so honored and privileged to be able to celebrate the 4th of July as an American. It's also an excuse to share on social media, as I do every year, my favorite rendition of the national anthem, which is Whitney Houston from back in the early 90s when she was singing it for the opening the Super Bowl. Absolutely amazing. Check it out at Steve Hilton X. You'll see I shared it this year. It just makes me cry every time. But there's something else I want to say about the 4th of July, and I put it out on a video which you may have seen. We're going to play you the video in a second, but I'll just set it up for you this way, which is the whole point of July the 4th to celebrate and remember the Declaration of Independence. So this is not our Constitution. This is the Declaration of Independence, which is an amazing, thrilling document. If you actually read it, it's an amazing document. And there's one particular line that I love because it resonates so much with us today, right here, today. And this is the line in the Declaration that I love. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Well, speaking as a Californian, honestly, what else do we have these days from the one party rule of the Democrats, the far left Democrats in Sacramento, than a long train of abuses and usurpations? Usurpation, remember, means taking power away, right? That's what's happening the whole time. And that's what we have, a long train of abuses and usurpations. And so therefore, what's the objective that they claimed were the abuses and usurpations by the British Crown? To reduce them under absolute despotism. Now you may say that's a little bit harsh. What we have to live under here in California, it's not quite absolute despotism, but it's heading that way. If you look at how they've been behaving over, as we discussed earlier, these ballot initiatives and so on, it feels like absolute despotism is, it's just a question of degree in terms of what we're experiencing now. And so it is absolutely time to throw off such government, to stand up against these abuses and usurpations today that we're experiencing here in California. And that is what lay behind the video that I put out this July the 4th. So belatedly, happy Independence Day, everyone, and please enjoy this video. Happy July the 4th, everybody. It is Independence Day. 248 years ago, America declared independence from the British. And guess what? 3 years ago, I declared independence from the British. I used to have one of these, a British passport. I got rid of that, and now I have one of these, an American passport, because I am an American and so proud to be an American. Now, the thing is, this Independence Day, I've been thinking about a different kind of independence. The independence that we need to declare here in California. Independence from these people, the Democrats. Look what's happened under this one-party rule under the Democrats here in California. We have the highest taxes in the country, the worst poverty rate in the country, the lowest home ownership, the highest housing costs, the worst business climate, the highest gas prices, the highest energy costs. Everything's going in the wrong direction here in California under one-party rule from the Democrats. So guess what? We need to declare independence from these people in favor of a change. It's time for a change here in California. It's time to declare independence from the Democrats, and that way we can make life better for everyone, restore the California dream, and make this beautiful state everything it can be. Happy July the 4th, everybody. Okay, that's it. That's our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you check out the Big Ideas Book Club. We got a great conversation about what's going on with the Latino vote in America. Very, very important conversation. I hope you enjoy that. Really interesting new book on that. Make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell everyone about the Steve Hilton Show, and we'll see you back here next week.